Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. What does Sandra Tanner have to say about biblical forgeries? We've talked a lot about Mark Hofmann's forgeries, but there are a lot of biblical books that are not written by their supposed authors. At least that's what some scholars think. So in this next conversation with Sandra Tanner, we'll talk about things like the documentary hypothesis. Did Moses exist? We'll also talk about the multiple Isaiah theory, and we'll get into some New Testament scholarship as well. Was Matthew written by Matthew, Mark by Mark, and those sorts of things? Is Sandra Christian? Does she believe in biblical miracles? It's going to be a fun conversation. I hope you check it out. I also want to remind you that we've got our newest George Throckmorton interview out, so if you're a monthly subscriber, we'll be sending that right out. And also, if you'd like to get it on Amazon, it's available on our Amazon website. Now back to our conversation. So you consider yourself still a Christian, is that
Yes,
right?
Yes, I'm a committed Christian.
And do you associate with the Methodists or another church? Or?
No, I go to a local church here in town, Discovery Christian Community.
Okay.
We would just be a standard middle-of-the-road Christian congregation, just following the Bible.
Okay. So, there are some critics of the Bible as well.
Yes.
It sounds like you haven't gone that way, though.
I've read critical material on the Bible. I feel there is sufficient historical confirmation for me to accept the record. I mean, there really are Jewish people that live in Jerusalem, and there really are ancient documents relating to the Bible. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls that show the preservation back before the time of Christ, and we have New Testament documents back into as early as 130 AD. We have part of the Gospel of John, so that I feel that historically we can show the preservation of the text. And on the New Testament, we are really on strong ground as far as the documents being the earliest record of Christianity. Now, one can say, I don't accept their story. One can say, you could say that that's really what the early Christians believed, but did it really happen? So then it's a matter of faith whether you're going to accept Christ's resurrection. But I believe the documents show the earliest Christians were fully committed to the idea of his resurrection. That's what got Christianity off the ground. It's not an idea that 200 years later is put back in to the system. The earliest documents of Christianity show that conviction of the resurrection to be there. And I believe it's true. And I understand other people look at the evidence, and for them it's not sufficient to continue to believe. So,
well, can I ask you a little bit about that, if I may play devil's advocate? Because yeah. I'll tell you what, I believe in the Bible, I believe in the Book of Mormon, so I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here and try to play maybe a critic of the Bible. Just recently, in fact, just today I released the last episode from Dr. Hugo Perego. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, the DNA guy.
DNA guy. So one of the questions, or I know some of the critics, like Simon Southerton, has said that, what do you believe about the creation? Because we've had American Indians here in America for 15,000 years, and if Adam and Eve lived just 6,000 years ago, we got a problem.
Well, you're assuming that is a universal belief of Christians on the 6,000-year earth. Granted, many have that position, but there are just as many Christians that accept an old earth. Mm-hmm. So it's not like if you don't believe 6,000 years, you can't believe Christianity. I happen to believe in an old earth. I'm not bothered by the DNA.
So you would say that evolution and the Bible are compatible?
Well, it depends on how you're defining evolution. I believe that it was all God directed. I believe there has to be a first cause, that I don't think you just have nothing and it springs into being universes and life. I think there has to be something before that. To me, the answer is God. I think that makes more sense than it just all come out of nothing. What do you make the eternal element behind the energy and matter? It seems like there has to be a force before that, something that always was there. Okay. And to me, that's God.
So, from a scientific point of view, if I understand it correctly, and I'm not an expert on this, but I believe that the Earth is, I want to say, 4.2 billion years old. At least that's the current scientific consensus. Would you accept that?
Yeah, I don't know that they're right on how old it is. I don't know how accurate you can be dating things back into billions of years. But I accept that, yes, it's an ancient Earth. I do not see that as a critical belief, one way or the other, to believe Christianity.
Okay. Let's move on a little bit to the Exodus. I know that there are some critics of the Bible, especially, that have said the Exodus never happened. Moses never existed. We have no archaeological evidence for Moses or an Aaron. Even for a Jew back in that time, from what I understand, the earliest possible record of Jews is about 1000 AD. The Tildan Stele, I think, talks about Syria conquering the house of David. That's the earliest. So if you go back beyond that, the Exodus, Abraham, there is literally no archaeological evidence. So do you believe in a literal Moses, a literal Abraham, the Exodus story? Do you believe those miracles happened?
I have no reason to not believe them. I believe that's believable. Okay. So, I don't have a problem with miracles. Now, some people, that's the big hang-up. They can't believe that miracles can happen. I don't have a problem believing miracles. And I don't have a problem believing that there was an Abraham. I accept the Jewish record as representing a history of the people of that time period. Just because something hasn't turned up doesn't mean it wouldn't. And I know the Book of Mormon people would argue the same thing with the Book of Mormon. However, I think that we're at a time period with the Book of Mormon that we have enough evidence to make firmer conclusions on that than you do when you get back to the time of Abraham.
Well, in the Bible, it talks a little bit about, I believe, I'm trying to remember the exact terminology. I should have looked this up beforehand, but 600,000 people, 600,000 males, which would mean if you count females in there, because they didn't count those back then, that you've got over 1 million people that would have left Egypt and come to Israel. I know that there's been some researchers that have said, look, if you've got 1 million people, they would have left garbage. They would have left some sort of record. They believe, some scholars believe that this is a complete myth, that the Jewish people accepted the myth, that they created this whole myth of coming out of Egypt. There's no we've got lots of records of Egyptians. They don't talk about the Exodus. What do you think about that?
Well, the conquerors get to write the history, and so that the Egyptians wouldn't mention the Hebrews, to me, is not surprising, but so I guess you'd say it's a matter of faith. I just accept that the Jewish history is valid. Now, I don't know that means every number count in the Bible is accurate, because that's all we have to go on. So I don't know. Maybe if you found another record, it might say there were less people than that. I don't know. But I accept the overview of the history as being authentic.
Now, since we're talking a little bit about Mark Hofmann and forgeries, let's talk a little bit about biblical forgeries. Now, there's been a question about the book of Deuteronomy, one of the 5 books of Moses. A lot of scholars believe in the documentary hypothesis. They believe that Deuteronomy does not date from the time of Moses, that it was a later, I want to say Josiah, if my memory is correct, found this book. Now, I remember hearing an interview one time that said that Joseph Smith was kind of familiar with this story about Josiah finding the record, and that the book of Deuteronomy specifically seems to be an ancient forgery, but certainly doesn't date to the time of Moses. Is that something you've studied? No,
I haven't spent a lot of time on that, but I think there's a difference here between saying forgery and writing down the history of a people. Well, I think of, like back when they did the movie Roots, and I don't know if this is a good analogy, But they had to take at face value the memories of the people in Africa, of what their family histories were, that were never written down. I think you have to realize that in the cultures of those days, history was memory, and everything was passed down through certain people that kept the history of their people. And you learned to recount these stories to preserve your history. So the fact that it's written down later, I don't think proves that it's a forgery. It proves that it's a later writing of the tradition of the people.
So would you say that you think that Deuteronomy specifically would have been written by Moses?
I don't know, but I don't know that I'd have to say it couldn't have been.
Okay, so it's a possibility that it could have been written by Moses. Is where you are. Let's talk a little bit about Isaiah. That kind of ties into the Book of Mormon. There are a lot of people that say, Joseph Smith copied Isaiah with biblical scholarship specifically, and I would even say that a lot of LDS scholars accept that Joseph may have taken some of the King James Isaiah as well. But there are some. Many scholars of Isaiah specifically that say that Isaiah was written by 3 or 4 different. In fact, they call them First Isaiah, Second Isaiah, Third Isaiah, Fourth Isaiah. And so critics of the Book of Mormon say, well, parts of Isaiah that were included in the Book of Mormon were written after 600 BC. They were written after the time that Lehi left Jerusalem. So how could Nephi have had parts of Isaiah that weren't written yet? Where do you fit on that controversy?
Well, I don't think that all the scholars are saying that there were all those parts of Isaiah. Obviously, when you get in the conservative Christian arguments, you would find arguments against the later portions of Isaiah not being contemporary with the writing of the first part of the book. And I would lean towards the more conservative end of that. Regardless, I don't think it gets Joseph Smith off the hook of using a King James Bible for his quotes in the Book of Mormon. I don't think that you solve anything for Mormonism by making a case for the problems of Isaiah. It does make a problem for the Book of Mormon if you can prove that part of it wasn't written until after the Lehi left. I don't know. I don't use that argument because I'm not sure of the reliability of that argument.
So, as I understand, a lot of LDS scholars would say, no, we kind of reject the 4 Isaiah theory. We think that it was all written by Isaiah, and that's why Nephi included it.
But I don't think that solves the problem.
Well, no, I understand. I understand that there's kind of a plagiarism problem that you're talking about. But as far as the argument that the BYU scholars would make that there was just one Isaiah, not 4 Isaiahs, would you tend to agree with?
I would be more to their side of view than the critics' side of Isaiah.
Okay. So, and let's move a little bit onto the New Testament as well. Just probably a month or 2 ago, there was a Radio West interview, and I wish I could remember. I want to say his name is John Spong. I might have the name wrong. He's an Episcopal minister, and I believe he's written a book called Biblical Literalism, a Gentile Heresy. And he has said basically that he does that even though he's a retired minister now, but even though he believes in Jesus, he believes in the Bible, he says that we need to let go of biblical literalism, and he's even been strong enough to say that he believes biblical literalism is destroying the Christian church. He says, I don't believe Jesus was physically resurrected. I don't believe Jesus walked on water. I don't believe Jesus turned water to wine. And I don't need to believe that to be a good Christian. Where do you fit on some of these miracles of Jesus? Do you believe that Jesus literally walked on water?
Yes. I believe all the miracles in the New Testament, and I have no problem with this. I believe I've seen miracles, and I mean, if you come from a position of not believing in miracles, then yeah, the whole thing falls apart. But those of us that believe God believe there's miracles. So I don't have a problem with those parts of the New Testament. And to me, the rise of Christianity makes no sense without the belief in the resurrection. I don't see any reason for the kickstart of Christianity, of the sacrifices and death of all the early Christians, outside of an absolute conviction that the risen Christ had appeared to people that they believed in and were willing to stake their life on.
So you believe that was a physical resurrection,
Yes.
not just a vision of a...
Right, absolutely.
Okay. So, yeah, because I want to say his name is John Spong. I might have the name wrong, but he says that is destroying the Christian church. He says that ancient Jews, the earliest Jews were, or the earliest Christians were actually part of the Jewish sect. And
Well, of course, they're Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they didn't make a distinction, and they didn't view the Bible as literally as we do. The stories of turning water to wine. Well, there's a lot of Dionysus, the Greek god, did that routinely, and even Caesar. There's some stories about Caesar walking on water and things like that. And he believes that the ancient Jews borrowed these things, and if you look at the Bible through Jewish eyes, you won't look at these things literally. So my question is, would you, especially when we're talking about the miracles of Jesus, and if you have to believe in the miracles of Jesus walking on water, that makes you a biblical literalist? Would you be comfortable being called a biblical literalist if that's the definition?
Yes.
You would. Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't. So even though you've done all this research on the Book of Mormon, and you don't believe that that's true, why would you? It seems like you have a different opinion on the Bible. Why would? And a lot of people, especially former Mormons, if they throw out the Book of Mormon, they throw the Bible right out. So why haven't you thrown the Bible out?
Because I believe that the earliest records of Christianity show that firm commitment and belief to that story. That was the story of Christianity. Jesus did walk on water. He did rise from the dead. They really believed those things as literal facts in their life experience.
So a critic would say, well, people believe that Joseph Smith really had a first vision, and he saw a Moroni. People believe that.
But historically, I think I can show you enough reasons that those events couldn't have happened.
Well, can't you do the same thing with the Bible?
No,
Not with the resurrection?
No, you do not.
Because we don't have his body.
But you do not have that kind of documentation that we have for Joseph Smith.
Well, but it's also 2,000 years versus 200.
If the Jews could have produced a body, they would have. The early Christians were committed to him resurrecting. Why didn't the Jews produce the body?
Well, there are some Gnostic Christians.
They're later. They don't have any bearing on the actual starting period of Christianity.
Actually, there's a Gospel of Judas. Came out a few years ago. Are you familiar with the Gospel of Judas?
It's not the time period of the...
Well, and of course Christians are going to dismiss that as a forgery of Judas, essentially, But the interesting story about that, as I have studied that, pretty much everybody believes Judas didn't write this.
Yeah.
But it does represent a brand of Gnostic Christianity, and there were when Paul talks, and we believe Paul was some of the earliest writings when he talks about other gospels that are preached unto you, and that this is the gospel that I preach unto you, the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's competing with some of these Gnostic Christians that are saying, you know what, in Gnostic Christianity, they believed that a physical resurrection didn't matter, that Judas helped Jesus to shed his mortal body, and they do not believe in a physical resurrection as Orthodox Catholic Protestant Christians do. So it does appear to me that there were, especially if you study early Christianity, there were some competing views,
Sure.
even in the days of Paul,
Yes.
that disagreed on even whether Jesus was really resurrected. And Gnostic Christians would reject a physical resurrection.
But why should I accept the Gnostics as being more authoritative? Sure, granted, there were competing views. That's why Paul's writing is to refute that. But the center core of Christianity is refuting the Gnostics. So I don't see why I would accept the Gnostics as having more validity.
Well, I just know that there are some people and like I said, if you're gonna do all this work on Mormonism, why wouldn't that translate over to Christianity as well?
Well, as far as reading, I've read on those issues, and I don't find them valid arguments against Christianity. But as far as writing on it, I haven't gone to Bible school. I haven't learned Greek. I can't go back and evaluate the documents in the original writing. So I don't think that I need to reinvent the wheel of doing research on and writing on the biblical defenses. I think there are books out there that already do that. From professors that have the training and knowledge of the Greek and Hebrew, that would take me a lifetime to have that.
Well, and even tying this back to Hofmann, because a lot of another word instead of a forgery would be pseudepigraphy.
Yeah.
We don't know that Matthew wrote the book of Matthew. Mark wrote the book of Mark. Luke wrote the book of Luke. We have no idea who these authors were. A lot of these early...
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily true. The earliest Christian writers accepted the designations. I mean, they were always known as being written by those guys.
Is that true?
I think generally it is.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, they would have lived with Jesus, and if they didn't show up until 100, they would have probably been dead by the time those.
Well, those books I believe were written before the destruction of Jerusalem. I think the Gospels predate the destruction of Jerusalem.
I'd have to double check, but from my understanding, Paul's the
Liberal
earliest.
scholars would say they were written after the destruction. I don't believe that case. I believe they were written before.
So, because from what I understand, as far as people critical of the New Testament, let's say, most of the four Gospels would date to after 100 BC, or 100 AD, excuse me.
No.
You disagree with that dating?
No, absolutely don't believe that, no.
So you think that Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark wrote Luke?
I don't know about Matthew, but I believe John wrote John. I believe Luke wrote Luke.
Some people think that John is actually a Gnostic gospel. There's a lot of, in the beginning was the Word was with God. That sounds very Gnostic.
We have part of the Gospel of John from 130 AD. That shows it was an established text around the Mediterranean already that was being preserved. The early writers, except John, I mean, there is not a question of the book of John. So why would I think it's some later text when it's already established at 130? And then in the beginning,
some would argue
Word.
that's the beginning, then, not the end.
Well, no, but the fact that it doesn't show up at Jerusalem. I forget where they find it at, but because it shows up in a different area, that it's already been established into the church curriculum of acceptance. And we have we have John 1:1 in about 180 AD in a manuscript. In the beginning was the Word. And so with the two manuscripts we have there of John, we establish that it always said the same thing that we have today. There's no evidence that it was ever rewritten. Mm-hmm. I accept that as an authentic document. So, and the earliest Christians accepted it as being John.
Okay. Well, for the record, I'm a believer too. I just thought I would try to ask some of the questions of critics that probably would want those asked.
Okay, read F.F. Bruce on the New Testament. He's one of the best Greek scholars. And he accepts the validity of those records. And I don't know who you're going to find that knows more than him. And Bart Ehrman studied under him, and I don't know how Bart Ehrman got off track because his teacher didn't believe what he's saying.
Well, Bart Ehrman would be a good one. Misquoting Jesus, I think, is one of his.
And I found his book to be, parts of it to be very simplistic arguments that weren't fair and dismissive. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather go with his teacher.
Well, that's interesting. All right. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Sandra Tanner. In our next and final conversation, we'll get Sandra's thoughts on Mark Hofmann's trial. Does she think that they should have tried him instead of in a plea bargain?
I said, well, I'd have gone forward because, yeah, I think you could have nailed the guy on every count, you know. But because they were convinced that there would have to be a division of the trials on the different forgeries and the murderer, that it would be hard to get the death sentence. And if you're not going to get the death sentence, then isn't it better to negotiate a settlement where he has to fess up to everything?
I hope you enjoyed that short clip from our next interview. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please go to our patreon.com/gospeltangents and subscribe for just $5 a month. If you'd like a transcript of this, please click the yellow subscribe button at gospeltangents.com, and I'll send you this and all future transcripts. Also, if you'd like a paperback like we've got here, those are available at our website at amazon.com. Just do a search for Gospel Tangents. Please get all updates at our Facebook page at facebook.com/gospeltangents. We're also on Twitter at Gospel Tangents. You can also get transcripts individually at our website, gospeltangents.com/shop. Finally, make sure that you subscribe on our Apple Podcast page. Just do a quick search for Gospel Tangents there and give us a 5-star review while you're at it. Thanks again for listening. Your support helps create more Mormon history classes and podcasts such as this, and so I really appreciate you listening. Please share with your friends. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here you'll see some more of our great videos. Thanks again.